April 2nd, President Trump announced a new tariff policy hitting many countries with significant tariff rates. So, what exactly is a tariff? In simple terms, tariffs are just taxes on imports. Have you ever wondered how the US decided on these hefty tariff rates under the new policy? Let's break it down and understand the formula behind them. Take Bangladesh, for example. In 2024, the US imported $8.6 billion worth of goods from Bangladesh, but exported only $2.2 billion. This created a trade gap or a deficit of $6.4 billion. So, now using the formula the US used to calculate tariffs, if we divide the trade deficit by US imports from Bangladesh, then halve the result, that gives us a 37% tariff on Bangladesh's goods on the US market. Now, here's something interesting. This formula also includes two key parameters we might overlook. First, epsilon, which is assumed to be 4, meaning that for every 1% rise in consumer prices, US demand for imports drops by 4%. Again, phi, set at 0.25, tells us that for every 1% increase in tariffs, US consumer prices are expected to rise by 0.25%. Economists call it tariff pass-through, meaning that the majority of the tariff burden is passed on to consumers. So, considering these values, if an average tariff rate goes up by 20%, the formula predicts a 5% increase in US consumer prices and a 20% drop in import demand. This formula oversimplifies things. When we multiply the two parameters, it basically reduces to a basic trade deficit ratio. But in reality, demand could be more sensitive to price changes, meaning the impact of higher tariffs could lead to even bigger disruptions than expected. Additionally, this approach has other inherent limitations. The formula assumes that a trade deficit means that other countries have unfair trade barriers in place that make it harder for US products to compete. But most international trade economists believe that's not the case. They argue that the US trade deficit is more about structural factors like US fiscal policy and the privileged role of the dollar in the global economy, rather than countries intentionally blocking US exports. In fact, fiscal imbalance, which means the government spends more than it earns, creates higher demand. This encourages more import, widening the trade deficit. However, since the US issues the world's dominant reserve currency, it faces no immediate constraint in financing these deficits. It can borrow easily in its own currency, at low costs and on a massive scale, allowing it to sustain large deficits. So, while this tariff formula used by the US seems simple, it oversimplifies the complexities of global trade.